Is reading really the holy grail for learning? Lots of parents tell me if I can just get them to read, I'll finally relax. And critics echo this warning. If you don't focus on reading, they'll fall permanently behind. You've probably heard the phrase, learn to read, then read to learn. Traditionally, kindergarten through third grade emphasized pre-reading skills, with fourth grade marking this shift where kids read to learn. However, this timeline is shrinking. In some places, the learn to read stage is expected to be completed by first or second grade, creating immense pressure. I've seen kids labeled as behind at just 6 years old. One of my clients was talking with another mom at their co-op. She was saying that her curious, bright child wasn't yet an independent reader, and the school suggested holding him back in first grade, a 6-year-old. Then other homeschooling moms chimed in with the reminders that if they don't learn to read in those early grades, they'll be left behind. Lots of more traditional homeschooling moms have teaching backgrounds, so it's not surprising that they continue on with what they were taught. My client, though, thank heavens, she recognized that learn to read, then read to learn, that concept, it's not learner focused. It's so the system can move more smoothly. And it's alarming how narrowly defined success has become, even with all the educational research focusing on incorporating play and the needs of the actual child as the learner. That seems to get lost on them somewhere along the way. So I want to unpack this issue and offer some perspective. But first, if you're new here, I'm Sue Patterson, your podcast host. Here and at All Things Unschooling Mom to Mom, I bring you an unschooling pep talk, and I try to do it weekly, usually short, 10 minutes or so, because I know you're busy with the kids and the laundry and the meals and trying to help the kids have a full, rich life. That's the basics of unschooling, right? Because the learning, it's kind of a side byproduct. So I'm here to give you practical ideas, resources that can help, and inspiration to encourage you. So about reading, the bell curve of reading development, it's just the average. The bell curve reminds us that average is just the middle point. And many children don't become proficient readers until 7 or 8 years old, and even though schools push for earlier results, the brain doesn't learn faster simply because schools demand it. Just like potty training and maturity, the brain does it when it's ready. And the data used to establish those benchmarks of 7 or 8 years old comes from traditional school environments where children are taught to tests and rigid standards. They don't have a lot of wiggle room. But that's not the case with unschooling kids in the wild. They don't follow standardized norms. They explore based on their interests. They may not be reading fluently yet, but they're often acquiring vocabulary and knowledge through conversations and videos and other experiences. Their curiosity is what's compelling them to learn more, not test scores and getting good grades. They move in that direction of their interests. They are learning more all the time. Are they reading? Maybe, maybe not. Are they bumping into words that pertain to the topic they're curious about? Probably. If they're not seeing it in print, they're probably hearing it in conversation or video. Their own personal vocabulary list is growing. We've all seen that, right? Your kid suddenly knows something that most kids their age don't know, and we spin around with, "What's that? How did you know that?" More often than not, they don't even know. This is the perfect example of learning being a byproduct of pursuing an interest or curiosity. They're showing you how they didn't need a lesson plan for it, right? So when parents worry that their child can't read, the comparison is often to grade level expectations. But are those standards realistic or necessary? Most young readers are still building foundational skills like recognizing letters and sounds or rhyming words, simple sentences. But maybe the school-approved second grade reading list doesn't include anything about spiders or the solar system or the signs in your neighborhood community. These will be the basis of your child's very individualized vocabulary list. And remember that bell curve? Half of those kids in that classroom aren't retaining their own standardized approach to reading. They're on the left side of the bell curve. So let's not sweep with a broad brush and say all those second graders are readers and my little guy isn't, because that's probably not even accurate. Oh man, this is kind of like pulling a thread on a sweater. One question leads to another, because it's very likely that those lower grades are doing what you and I and also their teachers would consider pre-reading activities, building blocks toward reading. Sure, the report card calls it language arts or reading, but it's the rudimentary pre-reading stage. And our kids can hang out in this stage for as long as they need to. Their brain is amassing what they need to move forward. And they probably are moving forward, and you're just not noticing the progress. It's tiny, but it adds up. So if you're worried about your child's progress, I want you to pause. Forget about their age and that artificial bell curve. Instead of focusing on what they can't do, try these 3 things. Number 1, think about their hobbies. How have they improved over time? Number 2, compare what they know now to a year ago. What skills have they gained? And number 3, recall the moments when they surprised you with their knowledge or their vocabulary. What were they curious about? And then what subject category might any of these fall into? Was it a vocabulary word they started using? They're growing their language arts abilities. Was it something about natural disasters? Science. Was it something about the election or politics? Social studies. They're all tiny little seeds of knowledge, but they count and they add up. So these are all signs of learning. You can see them if you look. It might be helpful to write them down. My Everything Counts ebook and the seasonal unschooling guides can help you see how everyday activities align with subjects like science and social studies and language arts and math. But don't let fear distract you from doing this. That voice in your head that wants to keep you conforming and safe, it's going to try to distract you with what they don't know. But that's easy to see. Your job is to say, okay, hush now. I'm looking for something else right now. Because probably the most important reason I've said that reading is not the Holy Grail is because learning encompasses so much more than reading. When we're in school, reading is the path to more knowledge. But it's really not the only way to get there. Schools treat reading as the primary pathway to knowledge because of their structure and their resources. When we were in school back in the day, especially if we went to school before the internet took off, or even during that first phase when everyone thought it was going to be the end of us all, we saw how the educational establishment resisted technology. Progress is really slow in big bureaucracies. If we have a kid in school now, schools may not catch up in time. The funding and the resources may not get to the school before it's time for your kid to graduate. But at home, we have all kinds of flexibility. We can embrace multiple learning methods, whatever works, and we can pivot if something else is available or works better next week. We don't have to petition a school board or hope the teacher is willing to change up her lesson plans. We can budget for what our kid needs and move in that direction. Because we've spent so much time in school, we've embraced that idea that reading is the only path to learning, sometimes without even realizing it. Because your child might learn through YouTube videos or podcasts, conversations with friends and family, hands-on trial and error, exploring their environment. Reading is valuable, but it's not the only way to learn. Recognizing and celebrating alternative learning methods can ease the pressure on you and your child. It's not always easy. Sometimes we don't even know we're doing it, or we find ourselves agreeing with someone who says, learn to read and then read to learn. We've spent a lot of time in that school approach that told us there was only one path. It's why we deschool, because you can tap into the reality of all that life has to offer your child. So if your child is in the pre-reading stage, I have an unschooling guide about learning to read, filled with ideas to make your home literacy friendly. I'm also planning a mini course on the topic similar to my Learning Math Without Curriculum course, because let's face it, we parents aren't all big readers either. We like videos and worksheets and audio versions of material. We process differently too. Reading isn't the Holy Grail for many of us either, right? But until that's ready, it's on my to-do list for the spring. You can tap into that PDF. It's packed with tips to help your child when they're ready. Let's support our kids in learning to read without unnecessary pressure. Learning is happening all the time. It's not waiting on the other side of the learn to read door. Kids are learning in so many ways. We just have to notice it. So have a great week. Leave a comment, subscribe, share to spread the word that unschooling works. For more tips, you can go next to my video, Stop Duplicating School. That might be helpful. You can do this. Happy unschooling, and I'll see you next week.